Good afternoon, my friends. Michael C. here, and I'm with my friend and my peer and my sponsor, Adam G. He's right behind me. I'll bring him up in a second. Welcome to our third uh, conversation. It is 12 Step Spirituality Live, Living in the Pause, Session 3, Surrendering to Presence. So this is three in a series of three before we take pause. So let me go get my friend Adam, and we'll go to work. There he is. Hello, Adam. How are you?
Hey, Michael, I'm good today. Great to be here.
Oh, it is. It is. I'm cold and you're warm. We were chatting before the conversation. Well, first of all, it's good to have you back, and it's good to pick up where we left off. Today, the conversation is on living in the pause, surrender to presence. And I'd like you to get us going because I love this part in your story where your obstacles to surrendering.
Sure thing. So it is great to be back, and yet I think I have to admit, gearing up to do step 3 this week was more difficult than I expected. I've done a lot of step 3 talks, but there was something this week, and I'm blaming it on the current pandemic. I guess I don't know, but I think part of it is some of my innate resistance to surrender. Even though I know experientially it's solid gold, in the words of my sponsor, Dwayne. So 3 things came to me this week. And the first was a conversation with my first sponsor in early sobriety. He said, "Do you believe in God?" And enthusiastically, I said, "Yes," because I really felt like I had that one covered. And then he says, "Then I suggest you start acting like it." Okay, so there's not a lot of compassion there. This guy was kind of old school, tough love, but in his defense, I wasn't acting like it. I was consumed with fear and worry, and I'm sure he had heard plenty of it. So in truth, back then and any day, I can act as if I believe in God. Remember chapter 6, he is very much the actor. No, my problem was believing in God was window dressing. I wanted to believe, but I didn't know how to make the decision, really. So the second thing that came to me was a good 10 years or so later, and I had met you, and I was sharing at a meeting about turning it all over to the care of God, my life and will. And when you shared later, you joked, "How do you people get out of bed in the morning?" Like, "Here, God, you want my life and will so bad? You can have it. So I'm going back to bed." And I think I remember this completely random moment because it nailed one of my big issues with step 3. I didn't want to do this because it felt like an abdication of responsibility. And if I didn't take responsibility, was some God really going to step in and save the day? I think of this story now, and I think of a phrase of Bill Wilson's. I was in spiritual kindergarten, unable to summon a power that I might trust enough. So then the third thing I thought of happened last week in a meeting. Someone talked about alignment with God's will instead of abdication. He said, "I can't control the ocean, but I can learn to swim in it." And I was a long way from that idea 20 years ago. The final thing I'll say is this week, one of my sponsors brought me a poem by the 13th century Persian poet Rumi. I posted it on this Facebook wall yesterday, and it's called "It's Rigged." And it goes like this: "It's rigged, everything in your favor." Rumi goes on to say, "There's a gold mine inside of you. You'll chase the satisfactions and pleasures of the external world, and then you will return to God." But I didn't used to feel this way. Because I didn't feel like being an alcoholic rigged things in my favor, but it really did. So instead of gritting my teeth and enduring it, I've come around to the idea that surrender is something I can actually embrace with gratitude. So glad I took you on that journey. How was your journey this week, Michael?
good in reflecting, and you reminded me of that. You know, it's going on about 20 years where we were in that meeting, and I was very fresh. And the meeting before that, there a woman with many, many, many years had said, you know, I don't think anymore. We were on the third step, and that was her. I've stopped thinking, and I don't think. And being fresh, I didn't see what she was pointing to. She was pointing to something much, much more profound, but it was a while before I could see it. And you're right. I actually said to the group, like, if you don't think, how do you get to work? How do you get up and how do you find your way to work? Never mind. It's because I was just, but what she was pointing to is, again, the presence, that power in us, me, I'll personalize it, that is greater than me, that had been waiting on me to wake up to it and surrender to it, turn my will and my life over to it, so that it can begin thinking not just through me, but for me. And that as it did, I would have much, the divine can think a heck of a lot better in me than I can, right? What is that? Three of the most dangerous words we say in recovery is I've been thinking. When I'm doing the thinking, it's up for grabs. It's all bets off. But as I've learned in surrender, and in that surrender, I used to say, yes, am I or am I not surrendered? And today it's more, have I been surrendered? And when I'm in those moments and I'm in the pause between the last thought I had and the next one I'm going to, and I've consented to the awareness of presence in my life, now I don't know that I'm tapping into the unsuspected inner resource that Bill talked about. I think I'm allowing myself to be tapped. And to your point, which I just loved, by the way, that your poem, that the gold mine. I don't know that I tap the gold mine or mine the gold, but allow that gold mine, allow myself to be tapped by it. And in those moments, the divine comes through. And if I talk to people that know me, they would say, I like those moments because it's, number one, it's easier to be around you. And you're a little bit more centered around me than on me. So this step is a very, very, very important part to not just recovery, but the presence and in the pause and revealing presence and showing up to make that happen. So that's my take on it. How about you? What was it like for you?
Well, I'm like a broken record on this. Everyone who's heard my story has heard this, that I was sober in the program 10 years before I took anything like an honest attempt at step 3. Because once I realized I didn't have to drink every day, and especially when the daily craving left me, I recommitted, re-enrolled in Adam's program for happiness. And it just didn't work. I would work harder to satisfy my instincts for security, approval, and control. I'd do anything, including betray my values to gain your affection and approval. But even then, when I got it, I felt like it was undeserved. The actor who's leading a double life, right? I was certain I'd be happy if things went my way. And then I felt jinxed and self-pity when they didn't. I believed the right relationship or more money was the key. And I'd get plunged into anxiety at the slightest setback, either with relationship or money. And I thought everything would be okay if people just behaved a certain way. And they rarely did. And they didn't seem to like my helpful suggestions. So the result of this at 10 years, and I talked about, really my first strong suicidal feelings started around 8 years of sobriety and continued until right around when I took this step. I was exhausted from all the people pleasing. I was anxious, resentful. I was isolated, self-loathing, as I talked about last week, and leaving behind me a trail of hurt feelings and discord everywhere I went. I felt separate from you even if I was in the same room as you. And I had a very difficult time moderating my negative emotions. I would get over the top angry about things that was all out of proportion. So that's how living my life without surrendering looked like at 10 years without a drink. So tell me how you did it better, Michael. Come on.
Well, as I'm listening to you, it's like everything in, whether we're talking centering prayer, 12-step recovery, my life is moment to moment. I can be surrendered in this moment, this minute, few minutes, and then either something in me or something around me triggers. And I'm now in that other part that, that brought me in to recovery. So what comes to mind as I reflect on it is, and I heard this and I continue to hear it, what's the deal? What is the deal? There's a deal in step one. There's a deal in step two. And I've been a businessman all my life, so I understand deals. And the deal in recovery, it's more sacred than deal. It's a covenant. It's a sacred covenant. It's a deal with the divine that if I'm on the holy jumping off place, and I jump, and I'm all in, and I'm surrendered, and to consenting to that awareness to work for me by coming through me, including my thinking, and expressing itself in a way that I'm of service to others. That's what it's like for me when I'm in that space, that I'm going to have a life, not just an experience of life, but a life, whether we're talking materialism, whether we're talking about whatever it is, that is exponentially better than when I'm at my top of my so-called game, writing my own self-will. And the longer I'm in recovery, the longer I practice that, the more faith I have in it. If somebody says, "Explain to me how that works," I can kind of point to it. Wow, that sounds kind of mysterious to me. Well, it's mystical, but the more I give that an opportunity to either help me or not, it works. And then the last part of that is accept whatever the outcomes are, to surrender. And sometimes those outcomes don't look and feel all that good. It's like, okay, what did I just do there? Did I just throw the baby out with the bathwater? Because it looks like something that was really important to my personality got away from me. And then as time goes on, I went, oh. So that wasn't, I'm getting goosebumps again now. That wasn't in the cards. That was getting cleared away. So what's now in front of me could show up. And oh my Lord, it's much, much greater than that. So step 3 is spiritual power to the 10th power. But the way to harness that is to surrender to it. So that's my story.
I love your story. It took me a long time to even think about, explore what it might mean to have God working in my life, let alone deepening relationship. We hadn't even gone on a first date, right? So how can I deepen the relationship? And I couldn't see that my self-loathing went hand in hand with it wasn't really conscious dismissal, but it was practically dismissal of the idea of reliance on a higher power. So I kind of had to trick myself a little bit because I do like to feel like I'm in control. I needed something to do, very practical, to enter into this relationship. And we've been talking about it over these last 3 weeks. So 1, I had to have awareness that the problem resides in me. It's not external to me. We talked about that. And 2, I had to have acceptance that solution to the problem is a relationship with God. So that's steps 1 and 2. And those are the necessary prerequisites, right? And so I had some work to do there. But 3 is action. So I had awareness, acceptance, and now action, making a daily conscious decision, because I'm inclined to take it back from moment to moment. So I need a way to make a daily conscious decision. So I needed a way to practice surrender. And I and I didn't really have one. I started with prayers, and the third step prayer was great. I went to a meeting, third step prayer on my knees, also great, but it was momentary, it was fleeting. And so I needed to have a way to surrender that was simple and understandable, a way to enter into that relationship with the God of my understanding. I had to take some of the mystery out of it. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of concepts that sound like a really good idea. Boy, turning it over is a really good idea, but I have no meaningful way to put it into daily practice. So I practice the third step every time I make the decision to pray and then actually show up for it. Yeah. And as Thomas Keating says, the only way you can fail at prayer is to not show up. So I show up for centering prayer and to a degree welcoming prayer. This is how I practice surrender. And it's how I show up for my relationship with God. And those two things go together, right? So now I feel less like I'm in a place of defeat, putting my arms down, bloodied from the battle. And now I'm just showing up for that relationship. And that's how I get to practice surrender every day. And that's made all the difference.
Yeah. Well, my final thought on this, Adam, is as I was reflecting on it, I always like my final thought to tie into, the living in the pause, which is kind of our slogan, and the step, the surrenderance part of the third step, surrendering to something, presence. And what comes to mind is, I remember our first conversation a couple of weeks ago, and one of my teachers said you can either be self-centered or God-centered, and both of those you're going to suffer some consequences. And that didn't make sense for a while, but it does now. But as it relates to centering prayer, that I can be centered in the pause. That pause between the last thought I had, which was me, and the next thought I'm going to have, which is me. And in that pause is nothing, but to give my attention to that space. And in centering prayer, consenting to the awareness of God's presence in me. That pause, that space is the presence in me. And so to the degree I can have moments in that, I'm finding when my attention is on that, I'm more curious about what is that than I am about whatever thought I was fixated on a nanosecond ago, and the next one that's going to be, because sooner or later, the last one becomes the next one. And as I practice this more and more, I'm as curious about the pause, the space, the presence, understanding, and I think in the literature, that's developing a relationship with something that's greater than me. To me, that's the essence of the third step. And whenever we have a chance to sit and pray, centering prayer, we do that as a group, and there's something profound in that as well. So that's my take on the third step.
Yeah, that was a revolution for me as well, from going away from this idea of handing it all over to entering into relationship. And they both have the same effect, but it mattered to me that I now had this relationship to enter into.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to our conclusion. We always try to keep it inside of a 20-minute window, and we're there. So I want to, again, thank you for inviting me to engage in these three conversations. And I know that we've got a few more conversations on our radar, but I think you and I were going to take pause for a couple of weeks or so to check in with ourselves and each other and reflect on where we go from here.
Yeah, no one wants to do inventory, so we're just going to put this off as long as possible.
Yeah, don't get me started. All right, well, thank you again, Adam. Thank you to all of our viewers, and we really hope that that you were served as we were taking advantage of the opportunity to bring our experience and our strength and hope to the table, 12-step spirituality and centering prayer. So, namaste.
Love you, Michael.
Love you
Thanks.
too.